Hello, in honor of Remembrance Day, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the number 10 Canadian General Hospital out of London, Ontario, which is the unit that Rod in Promise of the Bluebell Woods was a member of. The character of Rod and Pearl in Promise of the Bluebell Woods was inspired by these two individuals who happen to be my father-in-law and mother-in-law. I started out doing research for family history purposes and ended up finding a story so compelling that I thought it needed to be shared. Today, I'm going to concentrate on the number 10 Canadian General Hospital, as I said, in honor of Remembrance Day. And if you want to know more of the story, and particularly the story of Pearl in the book, you're going to have to read it. For the purposes of getting the historical background of the book accurately depicted, I had lots of different references, the main one of which was this book, Battle for Life, that was put together by Jack Hyatt and Nancy Geddes-Poole of the University of Western Ontario from the war records of the number 10 Canadian General Hospital. In addition to this book, I had transcripts of interviews with Ken, as well as a diary of his, and interviews with Yvonne, who happened to still be alive at the time of writing of the book. In 1940, when war was declared, Ken and all of his buddies decided they were signing up. Unfortunately, Ken did not pass the medical because of some injured toes that had been part of a basketball accident. He was a very athletic man. However, he did not give up. He asked what he was fit for, and he was told that because he was a lab technician, he was in fact fit to join the army and to serve at the London Military Hospital. There was no guarantee of service overseas, but he gladly joined up. This hospital's purpose was to treat the injured when they came back home. The slide shows Ken in the early days of the war, along with all of the members of the London Medical Hospital. London Military Hospital. In this picture, you see Ken with one of the ambulances he was responsible for. He started his service being a corporal, responsible for the ambulance corps, and moved up to quartermaster. The other pictures here are of the front and the rear buildings at the London Military Hospital. The lower lying buildings are the staff quarters. In 1942, a decision was made to deploy a 1,200-bed field hospital from London, Ontario. Ken became the acting quartermaster as the unit recruited staff and equipment, most of which came from London and surrounding area. In the fall of 1942, Ken and all the other non-commissioned officers went to Camp Borden for training. Meanwhile, the other officers, i.e. the doctors and nurses, went to separate training camps. They were all brought together in Stratford, Ontario, prior to their deployment. They could apparently be seen marching some more all around Stratford. They were trying to get fit before leaving for the war. On December the 9th, they marched through Stratford for the last time and arrived at the train station, where they caught a train to Halifax. It must have been quite a sight to see that whole military hospital unit leaving for the war. They were excited when they heard that they were traveling on the luxury liner, the Queen Elizabeth, but disappointed when they found out that it had in fact been reconfigured to ship troops overseas, and they were sharing bunks in suites that would normally have 2 people, and they had 5 sets of 3 high bunks, making 15 people per room. As they traveled across the Atlantic, expecting to be at the front soon after their arrival there, The invasion was delayed by almost a year. So they were stationed in a former psychiatric hospital in Leavesden, United Kingdom, and that is pictured in the right-hand picture. The white buildings are where the 1,200 beds of patient wards were situated. In the initial time in the hospital unit in the United Kingdom, there was a lot of spare time, and mostly they were treating venereal diseases. However, the caseload of men evacuated from the front lines built up gradually. The local community stepped up to provide entertainment for the boys who had left everything behind in order to save the United Kingdom. Men met and married women from their exposure to local citizens at these events. And as a result, 40,000 war brides came to Canada after the war. There was great frustration about the delay. They had left everything behind and expected to be doing something active to prevent the Germans from progressing in their aggression. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. In particular, the doctors were concerned because their pay had been significantly reduced in order to become a doctor in the military, and their wives were struggling back home. So the frustration was really on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, after 18 months of waiting, they were sent to a training camp at Scotch Corners, then to a holding spot in the south of England while awaiting the deployment order. On July 23rd, 1944, 6 weeks after D-Day, 377 men and women, as well as one mascot goat named Chewy, set out to cross the English Channel. The pictures here show the land and water transport that was being used at the time. French citizens welcomed them warmly, very thankful to be liberated from German control. Here you can see the women in their transport vehicle, as well as you can see one of the tents once it was erected. The junior officers were sharing tents, 2 to a tent, whereas the senior officers had individual tents. When they arrived in Bayeux, France, to the farmers' field where the hospital was to have already been erected by the advance party, they found it empty. 2 nights of worry and sleeping rough while they awaited the arrival of the equipment wore on everyone. When they came down the road, there were cheers and a great deal of excitement. And it turned out that they had simply been delayed because there was a backlog of vehicles needing to be transported across the channel. It would have been a disaster had the ship with those pieces of equipment on it sunk or been otherwise detained by the enemy, because it was impossible to replace such equipment in those days. There was a great shortage of everything during the war. These pictures show mostly the bell-tented area of the compound, but the right-hand one shows a little bit more of some of the larger tents. And as you can see in the left-hand picture, Ken has devised a shaving station out of doors, the reason being that he was 6'4" and couldn't stand up in the bell-shaped tents. Here is a better picture that was borrowed from the book that I showed you the cover of earlier. And it's a bit less clear, but it does show more of the total expanse of the hospital grounds and makes it easier to imagine what it must have been like to have a 1,200-bed hospital under canvas. In the initial days in Bayeux, France, the staff had to adjust to the constant sounds of the war raging very nearby. They knew that a loss at the front would mean their capture. There was just not enough distance between them and the action. There were also numerous challenges of running a hospital in a farmer's field. So there was no source of water. other than a muddy creek that couldn't be used. So they had to truck in the water on a daily basis. All of the personnel and patients were rationed, with one bucket of water being the ration, and that bucket needed to be sufficient for their hygiene as well as their consumption. It was a challenge to maintain equipment without running water. Blankets couldn't even be washed between patients. One must remember as well that every hospital was treating not only the Allied forces, but the enemy forces. So there were men separated from the men they had just been battling with by mere sheets of canvas. The hospital devised the process of securing bilingual enemy soldiers who were recovering and in good enough shape to act as orderlies, and they used them to translate so that they could in fact treat the enemy forces. In the early days after their arrival, there was a serious fire in the surgical tent, and it was only due to the quick action of everyone that they were able to get the patients removed from the tent. And while the tent finished burning, the surgeons completed the operations in the open air theater that was now their only choice. As you can see, this field is full of grass, and there was a lot of rain in that year, and it became a mud pit. And the staff seemed to be traveling from tent to tent across the property with their feet sticking and being sucked into the mud with each and every step. They were busy with patients arriving at almost any hour of the day. There was little time to sleep or eat. However, there was another lull in activity for the number 10 when the Allies succeeded in pushing the line from the Bayou base they were at. The hospital personnel felt forgotten by the brass, and it took the active work of the matron of nurses to get them reassigned to a new location in Turnhout, Belgium. In Belgium, they were delighted to find out that they had been assigned a building for both the hospital and the quarters. It should have been welcome relief, but it turned out not to be. The enemy forces had occupied this building prior to their arrival and had sabotaged it before leaving. The worst point of sabotage was the furnace, and they could not get parts because of the parts shortage of everything. It wasn't just part shortage, but everything, supply shortages that was part of World War II. So they were forced to suffer the cold indoor temperatures. Coal burners were acquired for the patient areas, but could not be run long enough to really make a difference. So hot water bottles became the choice of making patients comfortable, as well as the nurses. Nurses were seen to stuff them up their shirts and walk around, gaining comfort from the benefit of the warm bottles. There was also a funny story that has a bit of a serious overtone to it as well. Colonel Jones was consumed with the task of building the red and white brick cross that you see in the quadrangle of buildings pictured in the middle on the slideshow. And the reason he was because they were succumbing to V2 bombs. It was the biggest threat to that particular location at that time in the war. The staff, however, laughed behind his back, wondering why he did not understand that V2 bombs were unmanned and could not see the cross. By the time the hospital unit got to Turnout, staff had changed, and it was no longer just London and area recruits staffing the hospital. The hospital also grew in size from 1,200 beds to 1,600 beds, with the addition of 200 beds for chest surgery and 200 for neuropsychiatry. Along with these additional beds came more specially trained personnel. The hospital became very busy again, with once again little time to sleep or eat while constantly being cold. But they knew they were lucky compared to those at the front. Throughout their war service, the personnel of number 10 worked hard to keep up morale and keep fit. When patients didn't need help, they played all kinds of sports, had a choir that sang in local churches, entertained orphans, and many more activities designed to keep them sane and ready for the onslaught of patients as the front progressed to the final victory on May the 8th, 1945. Demobilization was expected to take many months, possibly a year. A khaki university was created by the Canadian military at the former site of the number 10 Canadian General Hospital at Leavesden. Ken elected to stay in England, work at the khaki university. He married Yvonne and did not return to Canada until April of 1946. Yvonne followed him in May of 1946, pregnant with their first child, Judy. I tell this story to illustrate the many different tasks men and women from Canada perform to ensure the future of our world. Not every member of the military battled the enemy directly, but all played important roles that resulted in the ultimate victory. I am sure we are all grateful for each and every one of those who served our country in any capacity. Thank you for listening.